Welcome to the Politics Guys. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. All right, I'm joined this week by my usual co-host, Jay Carson. Hey, Jay, how are you doing this week?
Good, Mike. How are you? It's good to be back.
Yeah, I'm doing just fine. It's good to have you back. So let's start with the big week in immigration policy. Now, there's a lot going on here, and we'll try to take it sort of one bit at a time and then sort of work everything together. But early in the week, the Trump administration announced that it would not renew temporary protected status for Salvadorian immigrants, which was first granted after a few major earthquakes in 2001 and has since been renewed by both Democratic and Republican administrations to this point. Now, the close to 200,000 Salvadorians affected by the decision will be given until September of 2019 to leave. El Salvador pleaded with the administration to grant a renewal, basically arguing that they would be unable to absorb their returning citizens and that the loss of remittances that they've been sending back to El Salvador would have a major negative impact on their economy. To get a sense of that, in 2016, El Salvador received $4.6 billion in remittances, and that's mostly from the U.S., and that made up 17% of the country's GDP. Now, the Trump administration is arguing that the program was designed to be temporary in response to armed conflict or natural disaster, and that El Salvador's situation no longer fits those criteria. So, Jay, what do you think about that decision?
Well, I think this is something, and there have been similar decisions with other of these temporary emergency allowances for immigration. Look, first of all, if you're a Salvadoran here, how does that make you feel if your country says, no, we don't want you back, but we want you to keep sending the money? That's sort of I don't know. It's troubling. A big reason I think why Donald Trump was elected is this sense that things are not as they are named, as they seem, and we ought to have a. I'm stumbling for this, but I think I said it once before. The Chinese have a term for the reordering of the names, sort of when you sort of bring everything back to being what it actually is. And look, if this is a temporary status, it shouldn't last 20 years. And I think that's a fundamental problem that a lot of Americans are troubled with. We're happy to be hospitable and charitable and open our doors for things like civil wars, national disasters, and so forth. But this isn't really that. It was sort of a de facto amnesty immigration, and it's violates certainly the spirit of that law. And I think, look, there ought to be a path to citizenship, and I think there probably has been for these folks who've been here for 20 some years. And that's not unreasonable to say this is a temporary program. Earthquake's over. And now they either need to find a legal path to be here or go back. I think the other thing Trump does in doing this and setting the 2019 return date is what he did with DACA, which is kick it back to Congress, which is where it should be, to say, all right, find a path to citizenship or a path to remaining here for these people. Because as a conservative, I mean, so often conservatives are painted as our reasons to oppose a lot of immigration policies are based on race and hatred and xenophobia and all this kind of thing. But really, speaking to most of the conservatives that I speak to, it's a matter of just there's a disrespect for the law. The idea that, yes, here are these laws, but we're just not going to enforce them. We're just going to kind of wink and that's it's a rule of law problem.
Well, I'll disagree with you on the spirit of the law thing. I think the spirit of the law was humanitarian, and so I think that the extensions actually are in keeping with the spirit of the law. But But
But 20 years?
I take no. I'm saying the spirit is about helping people who have experiencing a humanitarian crisis in their country, and I think unfortunately there have been huge problems in El Salvador for a long period of time. But that said, I would accept your argument that, in fact, I think the Trump administration is probably right in terms of sort of the letter of the law, in the sense that this was supposed to be temporary. And you're right, 20 years is not, or nearly 20 years is not temporary. I think that's a fair point. That's a good point. And, I think the positive way to spin this, give the administration as much credit as possible, the way to spin this is to say, well, like you said, they're doing exactly what they did on DACA. But I don't see it that way. I think that if the administration had, say, announced this along with some sort of legislative proposal to give these folks some sort of permanent status, then I would have agreed with you. I would have been happy to agree with you. But I see this as, at least as far as the Trump administration is concerned, as part of a pervasive pattern of behavior. And we're going to get into this more with some other things, a pattern of behavior that, yes, I'm going to come right out and call racist, because I think that's exactly what it is.
Well, I guess, again, to me, the temporariness, think of it this way. We've had a number of natural disasters in this country recently, and I've traveled to Europe, and Italy is a wonderful country, a beautiful place, beautiful people. What if some natural disaster were to strike here, and I would say I'm going to relocate temporarily to Italy? And then 10 years go by, 15 years go by, and the Italians say, well, hey, I think things have straightened out. When you heading back? And I'm, nah. This is the sort of thing that undermines public trust in our institutions. When you say we have it's a temporary program, wink, wink, but no one is, it's really going to be permanent. And that's I think one of the reasons why there's frustration and sort of this drain the swamp idea. So I wouldn't, and then I think that to attribute Trump's lack of putting together a legislative proposal on racism, I think that ignores a whole lot of other, just Trump not being good at playing this game.
Well, we'll talk more about that, because again, I think
Sure.
it's a pattern of behavior, and a number of people have brought this up, and we'll get into this a lot more in a few minutes here. But I'll try to make a case for that. So,
Okay.
let's talk about sort of the second big thing I think that happened, is that also it was early this week. A federal judge issued an injunction ordering the Trump administration to partially restart the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA program, as legal challenges to it play out in the courts. Now, the ruling only applied to those currently enrolled in the program, which leaves the administration free to not grant new requests. And the judge, William Alsop, who's a Clinton appointee, wrote that the administration's contention that DACA is illegal is based on a questionable legal premise, and that attorneys for the immigrants have clearly demonstrated that they are likely to suffer serious irreparable harm unless the court issues an injunction. The administration is, I'm sure, going to quickly appeal this ruling, and that kind of further muddies the waters on this issue, which, of course, Congress and President Trump have been working on this week. More on that in a minute here. But before we get to that, Jay, what do you think about this ruling?
I think the judge is wrong. I think it gets overturned on appeal. As you know, the court rulings so far have been that the DACA program is unconstitutional. Now, again, you can have different courts have different opinions, and they work their way up and eventually get resolved in the Supreme Court. So I think it's wrong. But the second point of the look, if there's an injunction that just preserves the status quo and essentially extends the timeline on this, I don't think that's a big deal policy-wise, a big policy shift.
Yeah, and to me, I think, clearly this judge has also indicated his disagreements with the Trump administration on the matter of policy. But in terms of the injunction, it seems to me that,
again, that's exactly the problem.
Right, but it seems to me that this is exactly what an injunction is for. If carrying this out before it's been through the legal process would cause someone to suffer, some group to suffer, irreparable harm, then that's exactly why we have injunctions. And so in that sense, I think it's a reasonable step to take.
Sure. I would argue though. I mean, there are four prongs to granting an injunction, and the first two biggest ones is irreparable harm, and the other is likelihood of success on the merits. And my sense is that this is weaker on likelihood of success on the merits, and also the irreparable harm. Even I think there's a question. Is there irreparable harm unless there is necessarily a pending enforcement action pending? If the government says we're going to deport you, we're initiating proceedings against you. I'm not sure that you've got the irreparable harm prong yet. If there's no threatened enforcement, this far out. So I think the judge got it wrong. Now here's the question: is I don't know whether it's worthwhile for the administration to fight it on appeal. Maybe you do on principle, but you don't try to expedite it, and you let the injunction stand while Congress works out a deal. I mean, I think that's one path forward. Because look, I think the president, I mean, and any executive has sort of the duty to defend executive powers, and in the case of this, to rescind orders that it believes and have so far been found to be unconstitutional. So
right. Now, before we get to that deal, I want to take a minute to thank the sponsor of today's show, and that is Da Vinci. Now, Jay, you've probably gone into a coffee shop and seen someone try to have a meeting right in the middle of everything that's going on.
Yes.
Yeah, and that could be kind of a real mess sometimes. It really depends on the coffee shop and the time.
And I'll also say, in my line of work as an attorney, there are a lot of concerns you have to have as far as about privacy and privilege and what you're saying in a crowded place where other people can hear.
Yeah, I mean, and you think about it, even if you're not an attorney, whoever you are, I mean, you got those tiny tables. You never know if you're going to get a good spot. Wi-Fi, hey, is the Wi-Fi secure? I don't know. Is it going to be working? Who knows? And of course, there's no way to give, decent looking presentations. And the good news here is that Da Vinci has an incredibly affordable solution to this, really common problem. They provide you with access to meeting rooms in well-known office locations in every city, and they make it totally easy. Just search, book, and meet. Your Da Vinci meeting room comes equipped with high-speed internet and all the presentation tools you need to make your next meeting a success. And so whether you need, a day office, a conference room, a boardroom, a training space, whatever, Da Vinci has you covered. And best of all, Da Vinci meeting rooms start at just $10 an hour. That's a great price. And in fact, even better, go to davincimeet.com/TPG, and for a limited time, you get 50% off your first purchase. That's DAVINCIMEET.com/TPG. Terms and conditions apply. For details, see davincimeet.com/TPG. Okay, so moving on, Jay, to that the biggest immigration story, really. The main event.
Well, there's sort of two mixed in there, but go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, exactly. That's a good point. The potential for legislative action. Now, President Trump held a very unusual public meeting with lawmakers on Tuesday in an attempt to hammer out a compromise. And members of Congress who were there apparently weren't informed that cameras would be rolling, which forced them to actually try to, speak like real people as opposed to kind of parroting talking points, which is more or less standard practice when the cameras are rolling. Now, in the meeting, President Trump appeared to be open to, more or less anything. At one point, he backed the so-called clean bill to extend DACA, meaning one without any border security provisions. And he said to conservatives that he'd take the heat for that. But then in the same meeting, he demanded a wall be part of any legislation. And at one point, President Trump flat out said, "I'm not saying I want this or I want that. I will sign it." Then later in the week, when a group of congressmen led by Republican Senator Lindsey Graham and Democrat Dick Durbin met with the president in the Oval Office to brief him on a compromise they'd reached, the president reportedly blew up at part of the proposal that would have given protection to some immigrants in the U.S. under the temporary protected status program that we talked about just a few minutes ago. the president reportedly asked why we wanted immigrants from shithole countries to come here. President Trump later denied making the comment, which seems pretty
That
dubious.
actually, yeah, that actually was related also to the lottery system
Right.
for allowing immigrations. That the shithole comment. But go
But
ahead.
the point thing is he denied making the comment. It seems pretty clear that's a lie. It was heard
That
by
doesn't sound like him.
multiple people at the meetings. The president's remarks, quickly rebuked by a whole bunch of people, and many people claiming there were yet more evidence that Donald Trump is a racist. And at this point, I think that's the only reasonable conclusion you can draw. Yes, the president of the United States is in fact a racist. All right, Jay,
Oh,
what do you make of
I
all
think
this?
that no, I think that is overstating it. Trump saying this is first of all demeans the office of the presidency. He makes himself look like a buffoon. There's the argument that goes, well, this is how real people sitting in the bar talk, and maybe that's true, but that's not how the president talks, and not how the president ought to talk. And you can look back at certainly other presidents have used colorful language. Lyndon Johnson, particularly President Nixon, to a great extent. But so I think this is Trump being the vulgar Trump that he is, and in some ways sort of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. But I don't think it's racist. I think that's overstating it.
Let me ask you this, Jay.
Yeah.
Before you go on, what would it take for you to come out and say that? In other words, is there anything that President Trump could do or say that would lead you to say, yes, in fact, the president of the United States is a racist? I mean, would he have to actually say, I think that people of color are less good than white people? Would it have to be that clear for you to say that, or is not a pattern of behavior enough?
That would be one. That would be an occasion when I'd say that. I think he's right, or you would be right if you were to call him a racist if he said something like that. But let's look at the bigger picture, though. If he's saying a lot of the third world countries and describing them as shitholes. Again, he's certainly being vulgar and crude, but if the point he's trying to make is that these are countries where there are failed governments, they are failed states in many senses. Life is much better here and other places in the Western world. Then he's not wrong, and to just say that is based on race, I think overstates it. Could he say things that I would say are racist? Absolutely, I think he could, but I don't think this is one of them.
Well, again, and I understand what you're saying. If this were an isolated incident, I might agree with you. But there has been a pattern of behavior throughout his career, and I think that at this point, I'll say two things here. Number one, I am convinced that President Trump is a racist. Now, but the second thing, and this is, I think, in a way, even more important than that is, well, what does this mean in terms of real consequences for real people? And that, is the thing I feel that's more important to focus on, because putting aside the fact that the president is a racist, what does this mean? And I think it means, a number of things. I think National Review's Jonah Goldberg wrote a great column on this week, and he pointed out, and I agree with him, he pointed out that he's damaging the Republican Party, especially among younger voters who, are eventually going to be the future of the party, because partisan loyalties, once they're formed, they can be pretty tough to change. And I think that's true more generally for those hardliner Republicans on immigration and the chances of future support from really the inevitably growing non-European white population in this country. And so
right. When I read the Jonah Goldberg piece, and I agree 100%.
Yeah, I think it was really good. Now, I think there are a couple other things here too, is you mentioned this Trump snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. I think he's an impediment to policy for at least three major reasons. Number one, it's really clear that he doesn't understand details. And so he muddies the waters with these conflicting statements, even in the same meeting, right? Secondly, he's easily persuadable by whoever he's talking to, or even if it's someone on Fox and Friends. We'll talk about that in our next story.
Well, there is sort of and some people are like that. It's sort of the I could tell you stories about my days in government, and there was the instruction that I was to be the person who spoke to this person last before the vote.
Yeah.
It was whoever talks to them last. Yeah.
Exactly. And, that's going to be a lot more likely to happen if A, you don't have a lot of knowledge, and B, you don't really necessarily have any principles except winning. So that's the second thing. Third, his, what I would say, shockingly bad impulse control ends up becoming the story, making real progress a lot harder. And if you're a conservative or Republican, damaging your party's brand, I guess you'd call it,
Sure.
So
sure. And again, this comes from if you think back of earlier in that televised meeting about the bill's going to be all about love, and it's spreading, but no love for the shithole countries. But and to me, that's why I don't think Trump is racist. I think he's just Trump. But regardless, I think Jonah Goldberg's right in that by doing these things and saying these things, he certainly gives the appearance that he could be racist. He opens himself up to that charge, and by extension, opens up the Republican Party to that charge. So, I think that's the and again to me that's the snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Of a couple days ago, he was close to a compromise of we have a deal to keep the Dreamers in, which most everyone agrees is the humane thing to do, and is not going to hurt our immigration policy. But at the same time, we have a deal to heighten border security, which again I would think most reasonable people. Now, whether you want to call it a 2,000-mile wall, I'm not so sure that's the best way to do it. But some type of border security, including physical security and physical barriers, that's not unreasonable and I think necessary if you're going to take the first step of granting amnesty to the Dreamers. And he had that, and then just sort of for no reason sort of botched it.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Absolutely. I think that outline of a compromise that you sort of sketched out there, that's sort of how I see it as well. Republicans give Dreamers some kind of permanent legal status with a kind of a long and involved path of citizenship. And in return, they get, greater restrictions on their ability to sponsor a non-immediate family, maybe more of a focus on
virtual wall type thing.
Well, and more of a focus on skills-based immigration, perhaps, more border security, what you're talking about. But also, I think Democrats aren't going to be able to sign on to a massive wall project, but you can work around the margins there and increase security without calling it a massive new wall, that sort of thing. And I think you're right.
I think what you do though for Trump is that you build half a mile of the big wall and say, oh, there it is.
He can do a photo op in front of it.
And say, because again, I think in some places and in some places walls already exist. And in some places they're appropriate.
Well, again, we'll come back to this more and more, I think, is that it seems to me that when Republicans in this Republican-controlled government succeed, it is in spite of President Trump and not because of him.
Well, there's a funny sort of thing that I think about that, and I'm not one of these people who think that Trump is this intentional madman, that he's just he's really crazy like a fox and
playing 12-dimensional chess. The rest of us can't even understand.
Exactly. But I think sometimes what he does do is there is a little bit of now like a good cop, bad cop dynamic. And you're seeing this where Paul Ryan is saying, no, we're still going to come up with a DACA deal. Congressional leaders are saying we're still moving forward with a DACA deal. Republicans can say, "Hey, we're willing to work with you, but man, we got this crazy guy to deal with." Um, so, my sense is, I think this is a big enough issue that there is still going to be some sort of resolution, regardless of Trump.
Yeah, well, in a way, here's going to be my real positive spin. In a way, it's almost a glowing testament to the strength of American political institutions that one branch can be almost wholly dysfunctional, at least the person in charge, and yet we find a way to get at least some things done. And boy, talk about trying to find the silver lining there. But there you go. So
Well, something else that I wonder about Trump, and I, this isn't based on any, actual inside information that I have or anything, but just from observing him over the year or so we have, and how he operated in business and how a lot of CEOs operate, is there is less of the here's my plan, here's my vision, go execute it. And this kind of comes up with you said, he didn't have any proposal to deal with the temporary status immigrants. But he sort of expects people to come to him with, okay, here's the plan. And then he accepts or rejects it and then sends them back to do it again. And they come back to him. And, eventually he signs off on it. I think that might just be kind of more his style I mean, if you want to call it leadership, but I think that's maybe more the way he operates is he is just a yes or no, I get it or I don't get it, but or you get it or you don't get it, but he's not a detail guy.
Yeah.
And he's not going to sit down and draft up real policy stuff. Now, you sort of had that happen where it wasn't him, but it was, say, Steve Mnuchin with tax working with Congress. I just think that might be a function of how he operates.
Oh, I think it's absolutely how he operates. I think he's incredibly, in this sense, at least when it comes to policy, incredibly lazy. He's certainly brilliant when it comes to manipulating his base and certain other things. But in terms of actually understanding, caring, taking the time to learn about policy, he could he clearly care less. Let's talk about another big domestic policy story. The Trump administration this week announced that it would allow waivers for states that want to impose work requirements on Medicaid recipients. Now, this announcement represents a significant policy change, and it came in response to requests for such waivers from 10 states, all of which have Republican governors and most of which are entirely Republican controlled. The administration's position is that this is a common sense initiative that seeks to get past what the conservatives often call the soft bigotry of low expectations. Now, the administration will be imposing a number of restrictions on these waivers, such as states having to allow job training, job searching, volunteer work, school, and taking care of an elderly or disabled dependent to count as the work requirement, as well as exempting anyone who is pregnant, disabled, or medically frail. Now, critics have two main arguments against this. First, that waivers of this sort are actually not legally permissible because by law, waivers can only be granted to promote the objectives of the Medicaid program. The second argument is that states are doing this not really to help their poorest residents, but actually to kick people off Medicaid rolls and thereby, save money by imposing these administrative barriers on program enrollees. For instance, in Kentucky's application, in fact, Kentucky is the first state that's been granted one of these waivers. Medicaid recipients would have to regularly recertify their compliance with work requirements to include notifying the appropriate office within 10 days of any significant income change. And failure to do so would result in removal from Medicaid for 6 months. And in Kentucky's application, which I read, calls this a quote-unquote learning tool for Medicaid enrollees, I'll say. So, Jay, what do you think of this?
I think that's good. I love it. No, I mean, if you read off the various exceptions, and those all seem pretty humane, the idea that you need to notify within 10 days, well, maybe 10 days is a little short, maybe make it 30, something like that. But Medicaid fraud is a problem. People who work and have income levels that exceed Medicaid, but yet still get it, that's a problem. That's taken away from those who
That's a
really
different
do
issue,
need
though.
it.
That's a
No, no,
different.
no.
No,
But,
it's a
but hold
related
on.
issue, but it's a different issue. I think we could talk about that, but let's focus on the actual, thing that's been done as opposed to those related issues, which you or I may or may not disagree
What
on.
I'm saying is the reporting requirement would allow you to catch those people who did that. If you have someone who's got a new income and then it shows up that they've got actually reporting this income and
Right. It's a
they're still
related
getting
but different thing. But my
All right.
point is, here's how I approach this. For instance, when we talked a lot about DACA, right? And I think both of us sort of agreed that while we kind of understood it in a way, or me more than you perhaps, supported sort of the goal that President Obama was going for with DACA, we felt it was problematic, was executive administrative overreach, because what he did is, instead of getting the law changed, actually just made the law be something other than what it was to achieve a policy objective that he couldn't get by working through Congress. I see this as the same thing, in the sense that
Okay.
you can agree or disagree with the value of a work requirement in Medicaid. Now, I have a feeling you would agree with it. I would disagree with,
I
but
absolutely agree with
the
it.
larger point, I would say, from the legal standpoint, I think this would fit with our DACA reasoning, is that you can't just impose this and just kind of sort of fit it in and say, well, work is kind of an objective of the Medicaid program because, well, people who have jobs, there's a correlation between that and them being healthier. And so there you go. I mean, come on.
No, and there's a difference though between DACA and this because first of all, in the DACA situation, the exception, the idea was these folks are in violation of the law, and you created, and again, it's not a well, is it sort of the intent that they be construed as a violator or not? No, it's they're here in this country without legal authorization, without some valid residency status, and yet then the president went in and in direct contravention of the will of Congress took steps to change that. Now, in this case, I see your argument saying, well, work isn't necessarily part of the goal of Medicaid. But I don't see it as being in direct contravention. It's not as if the Medicaid statutes say to be eligible, we want to make sure you're not working. And the idea that that that's what we're getting at, I mean, would seem to be absurd. I mean, it used to be, back in the day, that I mean, this was a core value of the Republican Party and a core value of our country. Look, you get up and go to work every day. I get up and go to work every day. Millions and millions and millions of people do.
I
And
agree,
look,
but you're focusing on this is exactly my point. This is, I think anyone who's being honest about it would say, the primary driver of this is making sure that these people who are sponging off the government work. And it's not fundamentally about improving their health. It's about this notion of grievance and fairness and that sort of thing. And okay, fine, if you want to have that discussion, great, but don't pretend this is about helping these people get healthier, because that's just BS. And so if the Trump administration wants to do this, then hey, put together some proposed changes to the Medicaid law, try to get that through Congress, and do it honestly and openly, but don't try to sneak it under like this. That's just a load.
Wow. So let me get this straight. You then would oppose, or you're saying you don't oppose work requirements. You just want them to be congressionally approved rather than by waiver.
No, I'm saying I do oppose them. But I think if they're going to
even
be,
if they were congressionally approved,
well, I would still oppose them, but I would recognize them as legitimate. So
Okay.
for instance, in the date of the research,
you would say dumb but constitutional.
exactly. I mean, to me, there's the evidence from what the research I've seen, there's absolutely no evidence that Medicaid enrollment discourages work because, you can't exactly use your health care to get food or housing. And so I think the analogy that's sometimes made between other forms of work-linked aid is kind of not a good one. But again, just what you said, I think it would be legitimate policy if it were passed by Congress. I just think it would be bad policy. To me, it seems to be essentially you can say it's because Republicans hate poor people. I think that's going too far. I would say it's just basically a lot of states that are very strapped for cash, are looking for ways to save money, and they recognize that this is in fact going to save them some money. And I think,
So what? But okay, let's follow that through though. How it saves them money in what way?
it saves them money because for every person who's not on Medicaid, that's their state share. They don't have to pay that X amount in.
Exactly. So, in what way would this decrease the Medicaid rolls?
Because people could be kicked off. I mean, people will be kicked off. So,
Or if they're employed, they may get health insurance through their company.
Sure, and I think there might be
they may relieve the state of this burden, leaving more money for the people who actually need it. And again, this is one of those great sort of Ronald Reagan moments. Is we don't measure welfare by or compassion by how many people are out of the welfare rolls. It's by how many people get off. If this helps people rise to a state where they don't need Medicaid. Well, isn't that the policy goal? I mean, the policy goal of Medicaid isn't to say, let's have as many people enrolled as we absolutely possibly can. It's to look, let's create an economy. Let's have people who are getting their insurance somewhere else than through government, and that's a benefit to those people and to the taxpayers.
Okay, and I agree with you in one sense. In that, I guess a lot will depend on how these waivers, how these programs are structured. You're certainly right. You could structure a waiver program or a waiver in such a way as it would achieve those, I would grant you, absolutely laudable and humanitarian goals. Now, from what I've seen, from how these programs are being structured, now the only one I've actually looked at in any detail is Kentucky's. That does not, to me, seem to be how they are actually structured. Now, this is going to play out, of course. We'll find out how this plays out. But from what I've seen, if you were in charge of this, I would probably be okay with it. I would say, well, I'd read it over and say, yeah, Jay's program makes a lot of sense because you actually are a compassionate conservative. But I don't think that Matt Bevin in Kentucky is. I don't think that a lot of these governors are. I don't think that they're nearly as good-hearted and as decent as you are. And so that's why I have great concerns about this.
All right. Well, we can just, I guess,
we can both agree you're a fine guy.
Pray for Matt Bevin, and yes, that his heart will be softened and be more like me.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Anyway, okay. Let's move on. On Thursday, the House of Representatives did something hard to believe, genuinely bipartisan. They approved a 6-year extension of the NSA's warrantless wiretapping program. Members on both sides offered an amendment that would significantly enhance protections for Americans who were swept up in warrantless surveillance of foreign nationals, but this measure was defeated when 55 Democrats joined 178 Republicans to kill it. Now, President Trump once again seemed to take multiple positions on this issue. He first tweeted opposition to an extension without changes, reportedly in response to remarks made after an analyst on Fox and Friends had something to say against it, which show, the president's favorite news show, apparently. Then hours later, he tweeted again, kind of backed off his initial comment, presumably after aides had a chance to, actually explain the program to the president and the administration's policy on the issue. Now, there seems to be little opposition to changing the program in the Senate, and so basically the passage of the extension is really all but assured at this point. So Jay, first off, I guess, what do you think about this extension without any changes? And secondly, what about all the president's shifting positions, or at least the 2 shifting positions?
Well, and again, I think that the conservative position on this for years has been this is a necessary tool in the war on terror. There are provisions, safeguards built into it as it is, and I think the members of Congress who are privy to the type of intelligence that comes through this and have the information that they see what these types of programs have prevented are very, very adamant that they need to continue, and that has been sort of a bipartisan position since the 2000s, and even notwithstanding there were a while where the Democrats would grandstand and say this is shredding the Constitution, yada yada yada. But when it actually comes down to the vote on this, they invariably vote to renew. And they're the exceptions. There's the libertarians, the Rand Pauls, and so forth of the world. But on the conservative side, who will always oppose something like this. But I'm not surprised, and I think generally it's good policy.
I mean, so you don't see this as a assault? Maybe not assault is too strong of a word, but certainly as sort of a chipping away at Fourth Amendment protections.
No, I mean, and again, we're talking about foreign nationals, and that's a different test than say wiretapping U.S. citizens.
But you don't think,
and it's intercepting foreign communications. That's what we do. No, I don't. I don't see it that way. I mean, this has been through the courts in various iterations, and the courts don't see it that way either.
Well, no, and again, I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's unconstitutional, but I guess I wish that more members of Congress were a little concerned about Americans' Fourth Amendment rights than I think that they are. And in this case, I'm kind of with the libertarians and some of those on the left who voted to not end the program. I wouldn't want to end the program either, but I think that here's something odd. I think that President Trump's initial response on this was maybe not. Maybe that's what he's trying to do, is give everyone a position.
You must have been watching Fox and Friends with President Trump, and if that's where you get your positions. But I'll leave it at that.
Well, I guess this
no,
is
look. I'm not saying this is an issue that is real clear cut black and white, and there's not concerns, there's not potential for abuse. I think there's always potential for abuse of government power. That's sort of the default conservative position. But at this point, the program having been in place as long as it has, I don't think you haven't seen that, and I think you have seen an effective way in protecting national security.
Yeah. Well, on to the other part of this issue, President Trump, who's styled himself a stable genius. I think this week he's
very stable genius.
Yeah, very sorry. Yeah, I mean, he's, I think, repeatedly demonstrated that he's actually neither of these things. And it occurred to me that this is nothing that wouldn't be fixed by a self-imposed moratorium on policy-related tweets, or at least if he ran them by an advisor to see if they're likely to cause, some kind of significant difficulties. Of course, there's no way President Trump would do that, right? And then I thought, maybe someone can appeal to the president's vanity. I mean, he loves giving catchy nicknames to people, right? Crooked Hillary, Lying Ted, Sloppy Steve, that sort of thing. And maybe there needs to be one applied to him that gets him so worked up that he makes an actual attempt to not be that. Maybe not stable genius, because it's sarcastic, and that's not what Trump does with his kind of monikers that stick and I think are effective. Maybe something, I don't know, like Fickle Donald or Erratic Don or something like that might be better. But pretty clearly, if you're a conservative, especially, you just got to say, oh God, what? Can no one stop this man? From shooting himself in the foot once again. At least that's kind of my take on it.
No, I would agree. And this is I think, oh gosh, I'm trying to think who wrote it a week or so ago. I want to say Daniel Henniger in Wall Street Journal, that there are sort of two administrations. There is the the administrations that actually get stuff done, that passes tax reform, that is serious on deregulation, that is taking some important steps, whether you like them or not, internationally. And then there's the Trump show, which is about tweets and Russians and porn stars and shithole countries and this again, just this bizarre Donald Trump reality show and not actual government.
Yeah. And that actually is a great kind of segue. And we didn't, I promise folks, we didn't actually plan this into what we're reading, because my recommendation for this week is an article called The Decline of Anti-Trumpism by David Brooks from the New York Times. Now, Trey put a post on this on Facebook about this article. I posted myself on it. I thought it was just a great piece of writing, really important. And basically, David Brooks makes this argument that there's what he calls the Potemkin White House, and which focuses on all that stuff that Jay was just talking about. And then there's what he calls the invisible White House, that behind-the-scenes stuff and the stuff where they're actually getting stuff done and perhaps becoming more and more effective at working around their not at all stable genius boss to get things done. I think it's a really interesting read, because if you think about it, what would the Trump administration look like to you if you never looked at or read anything about Twitter? It would probably look a whole lot different. I think it's worth a read. So even though I plugged it on Facebook this week, I encourage everyone to give it another read. Also, this week, it'll be up probably sometime later on Saturday, early Sunday, is the blog this week. There are going to be actually some pictures of Jay, Trey, and myself. Listeners have asked for that for a while, so we're going to show you, put some faces with the voices.
Well, a calendar coming out pretty soon.
Yeah, well, God, no, yeah, definitely that would be nobody's idea of a good idea. But also some more recommended reading and an update on the future of the Politics Guys, and as we transition into a nonprofit organization over the weeks, the next few weeks, actually. So check that out, and that's politicsguys.com/Mike. Okay, Jay, what do you have for us this week?
Well, I'll tell you what, I think that the David Brooks piece you mentioned, that may have been what was weighing in my mind. Although I know I've read other similar pieces like that, that again say that there are sort of two Trumps, or sort of the real grown-up White House and then the Trump show. So my pick will be something completely different, big picture. This is a book that a friend got for me for my birthday a month or so ago, by Odd Arnie Westad, about the Cold War. He is a Harvard historian. His name, Odd Arnie, he's like originally Norwegian, I believe. So it's not like a description of him. It's just actually it's part right. It's like a shortened version of, I think, Odd Vard or something like that is his full name. But Mike, this is something that I'm fascinated by Cold War stuff. I mean, you and I grew up in what was sort of the second and then final act of the Cold War, and so this takes it back to the ideological underpinnings, and then also just the geopolitical underpinnings and how those two forces kind of aligned. And it's billed as sort of, this is one of the first books that looks at the Cold War in the larger sweep of history. So often you can't really see something while you're in it, or determine its significance while it's going on. But at this point we can look back 25 years and say, okay, here's where this is, here's how it got here. And it also may be, depending, I think, the book doesn't say this, but again, it's just a curiosity and something to think about historical perspective. We may also look back 20 years from now and say, well, the Cold War didn't really end. There was just sort of a weird kind of hiatus. And now, Russia has emerged again as a geopolitical, let's say, adversary, that really a role they really hadn't played for most of the 90s and early 2000s. So anyway, this is like a big history book, big picture stuff. But and it's also interesting because again he is Scandinavian by birth and gives us sort of a different view of the Cold War than what we typically see here in America. I mean, as someone of Scandinavia that was a very much on the front lines and at one time had been occupied by the Russians during World War II, or at least there was a presence. I'm not sure whether they actually, but regardless, it's fascinating. And if you're looking for like a big book to kind of just sit around and huddle by the fire while the snow continues to fall, this is a good one.
It sounds great. And I'm sure at this point listeners are saying, Jay, what's the title, man?
Oh, no, the title was the Cold War.
The Cold War, okay.
That's all there is to it, yes. The Arnie Westad, the Cold War.
I kept on thinking, okay, he's going to mention the title there at some point. So there you go.
No, I thought I got that out there. Yes.
No, there will be. Well, of course, we'll have links to all this in the show notes.
The complete title: The Cold War: A World History.
There you go. Okay. Well, that's it for this episode. Thanks everyone for listening. We hope you liked what you heard and that you will check out today's sponsor, Da Vinci, finding an incredibly affordable meeting room. I can talk in every city with Da Vinci. Go to davincimeet.com/TPG, and for a limited time, get 50% off your first purchase. You know, as we do move into our nonprofit, no ads status here, it'll actually be in early February, listener support is more important to us now than ever. So if you'd like to help us out, go to politicsguys.com and click on the Patreon link to become a sustaining monthly supporter, or PayPal link there to make a one-time or regular sustaining monthly contribution. And if you want to support the show without spending anything, you can share this episode with your friends and followers, or pass along our new show posts and tweets on Facebook and Twitter. Also, leaving reviews and ratings on iTunes does help. If you want to get in touch with us, mail at politicsguys.com, or our Facebook page where we post stuff throughout the week. That's facebook.com/politicsguys page. We're also on Twitter at Politics Guys. Also, before we sign off, I should mention that next week's show will be airing on Sunday afternoon, not Saturday afternoon, just to let you know that. And finally, the executive producers of the Politics Guys, Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Trey Orndorff, and Bruce Johnson. Today's show was produced by Michael Baranowski. That's me. We'll be back with a new show on Wednesday. We hope you'll join us.